Welcome on board, chosen one. Let's get something straight before anyone gets comfortable. They said you were nothing special. They said you'd fade out. They said you'd fold, beg, explain yourself, or disappear quietly. Look who's still standing. Look who didn't break. Look who forced the room to go quiet without saying a word. Funny how the same mouths that doubted you now struggle to even say your name. When they said you were finished, when they laughed, when they told others you peaked. Yeah, keep those moments in mind, because right now those same people are moving differently, slower, quieter, nervous. You felt the pain first. That part was real. The isolation, the disrespect dressed up as jokes, the way they minimized you like it was sport. You remember sitting there wondering what you did wrong, replaying conversations, blaming yourself for having a heart in a world that treats it like a weakness. They pushed you into silence and called it your natural place. That wasn't an accident. That was strategy. And here's the cold fact they never planned for. You didn't disappear. You adapted. Now there's this weird shift in the air. The storm already passed, but the silence is louder than the chaos ever was. People watch you from a distance. Conversations stop when you walk by. You notice the forced smiles, the fake calm, the sudden respect that feels late. That's not confidence on their side. That's caution. You think they forgot you? No. They study you. They scroll back through old messages. They replay moments they dismissed too fast. They connect dots they ignored when they thought they were ahead. They tell themselves stories to sleep at night, but the truth keeps tapping on their skull. You were never weak. You were patient. Press like and subscribe right now. Not for me. For the mission. For this message to reach the ones who need it and to send it right back into the universe where it belongs, back to the truth they're choking on. If you saw yourself through their eyes, you wouldn't recognize the version you've been judging. They don't see your fear. They don't see your doubt. They see someone who took hits that would have erased them and still didn't turn bitter, loud, or sloppy. They see restraint. They see someone who didn't rush revenge, didn't expose everything, didn't show their full hand. That scares people. There's a story nobody tells out loud. Every era has someone they tried to shrink first, someone they underestimated because it made them feel safe. History is full of names that were mocked before they were respected, ignored before they were feared. The common pattern? Those people didn't win by screaming. They won by surviving long enough to change the rules. You're in that phase right now, the quiet one, the part where outsiders think nothing is happening while insiders feel something is wrong. Your enemies tried everything, talking behind your back, twisting your story, comparing you to others to feel taller. All it did was expose them. Because while they were busy managing your image, you were managing yourself. While they were watching for your collapse, the universe was watching your discipline. Now comes the part they didn't rehearse for. Your calm feels disrespectful to them. Your silence feels like a threat. Your growth feels unfair. You don't chase. You don't explain. You don't ask for permission to exist loudly or quietly. And that's the most terrifying thing of all. You're no longer reacting. There was a time they thought you'd bow. There was a time they waited for you to apologize for being different. There was a time they assumed you'd stay where they put you. That time is over. This isn't about ego. This is about clarity. You finally see the pattern. You finally understand why they acted the way they did. You were a mirror they couldn't stand to look into. You reminded them of effort they avoided, courage they postponed, and discipline they joked about instead of building. So they tried to label you, because labeling feels like control. But labels don't work on people who outgrow rooms. Right now, you're standing in the aftermath of a battle you didn't even announce. The dust settled, the noise died, and all that's left is truth. They're not angry anymore. They're unsettled, because deep down, they know something shifted permanently. You didn't just survive, you closed a chapter they're still stuck rereading. If tears come, let them. That's not weakness leaving you. That's pressure releasing. That's the weight of being misunderstood, finally sliding off your shoulders. This is the moment where the villain becomes the hero, not by changing masks, but by refusing to play small again. Calm, sharp, untouchable. And if you ever doubt it again, remember this. They don't fear who you were. They fear who you became without their approval. That's why they're terrified. And chosen one, if you're still here, it's not by accident. Something in this message pulled you back before you could scroll. That pull is the same reason they keep watching you in silence. The same reason your name lands heavier than you realize. You're about to see why their fear makes sense, but this part only works if you stay present. No skipping, no half listening. This isn't motivation you play in the background. This is truth that changes how you see yourself forever. So do this one thing to lock yourself in. Drop 777 in the comments. Not because it's magic, not because of superstition, but because it's a signal. A signal that you're choosing to stay through the uncomfortable parts. A signal that you're done pretending your isolation was random, that your silence meant nothing, that the universe wasn't shaping you while others were busy underestimating you. From here on, we're breaking this down step by step, slowly, clearly. And if you really are who this message is meant for, you'll feel it. That quiet pressure to keep watching, that need to understand the full picture. Because by the end, you won't just know why they're terrified. You'll finally see yourself the way they always have. Now let's dive in. Number 1, they don't see you as human anymore. They see a problem that won't stay buried. Some people aren't scared of your noise. They're scared of your restraint, because restraint means control, and control means you could end them without trying. Let's strip the softness out of this right now. When they look at you, they don't see a person just getting by. They don't see someone living a normal life, chasing comfort, blending in, hoping to be liked. That's the lie you tell yourself because it's safer. That's the version of you that lets you sleep at night without realizing how dangerous you've become. They see someone who walked through pressure that would have snapped them in half. And instead of collapsing, you learned how it works. You learned the rules of pain. You learned how people move when they're scared, how they lie when they're threatened, how they betray when they feel smaller than you. Hell didn't just test you, it trained you. That's why their behavior around you shifted. They see eyes that don't rush anymore, eyes that don't beg, don't flinch, don't explain, eyes that already know the ending, even if the story is still playing out. You think your silence means you're holding back. To them, that silence feels like a loaded weapon on the table. Nobody knows when it'll go off, and that's exactly why they can't relax. You wonder why they stare too long, why they suddenly get defensive, why jokes turn awkward, why respect shows up late and fake. Here's the answer you've been avoiding. They don't see weakness in you. They see containment. They know you've suffered enough to stop caring about approval, and that's the most dangerous stage a person can reach. People who still need applause are predictable. People who still need validation can be controlled. But someone who already lost everything they cared about, Someone who survived humiliation, isolation, betrayal, and kept their spine straight. That person doesn't negotiate anymore. You keep asking yourself, why do they act weird around me now? Because they remember how they treated you when they thought you were harmless. They remember the disrespect, the shortcuts, the way they spoke over you, dismissed you, used you as a reference point for what not to be. And now they see the shift. Not loud, not flashy, surgical. They know you're not chasing revenge, and that terrifies them more than rage ever could. Rage burns fast. Calm endures. They see someone who doesn't need to dominate the room to own it. You don't raise your voice. You don't announce your growth. You don't flex. You let time do the talking, and time has been very loud on your behalf. That's why they replay old moments. That's why they stalk quietly. That's why they suddenly remember your potential now that it's too late to influence it. You still think you're ordinary because you remember your lowest moments too clearly. You remember crying when nobody was watching. You remember doubting yourself. You remember almost giving up. What you don't realize is that those moments erased your fear of breaking. And once fear is gone, obedience dies with it. That's what they see. They see someone who already faced the worst version of themselves and didn't run. Someone who knows what loneliness tastes like and stopped being scared of it. Someone who learned how to stand alone without turning bitter, loud, or sloppy. That's not weakness. That's refinement. You became the problem the moment you stopped asking for permission to exist as you are. They noticed it before you did. That's the part that stings your ego a little. The shift happened quietly. One day you stopped reacting. One day you stopped explaining. One day you stopped shrinking yourself to keep the peace. And suddenly you weren't fitting into the role they assigned you anymore. People hate when you outgrow the version of you that made them comfortable. They see someone who can walk away without slamming doors, someone who can listen without agreeing, someone who can smile without submitting, someone who can forgive without forgetting. That combination is lethal, because it means you're no longer controlled by emotion, you're guided by clarity. And clarity scares manipulators. They don't watch you because they admire you. Don't flatter yourself like that. They watch you because they don't understand you anymore. You stopped being readable. You stopped being reactive. You stopped leaking your plans through your emotions. And now they're guessing. Guessing is hell for people who need control. You ask yourself, if I'm so powerful, why do I still feel heavy sometimes? Because growth doesn't erase scars. It just turns them into armor. You feel the weight because you're carrying awareness now. You see patterns others still deny. You notice behavior shifts, energy changes, forced smiles. That awareness isolates you, but it also protects you. And they know it. They see someone who could expose them but chooses not to. Someone who could destroy reputations but stays silent. Someone who could take the easy win but prefers the long game. That restraint tells them everything they need to know. You're not impulsive, you're precise. So no, they're not scared of your success. They're scared of your timing. They're scared of the moment you fully see yourself the way they already do. Because when that clicks, when your self-image finally catches up to their perception, you stop doubting your instincts. You stop second-guessing your power. You stop tolerating disrespect disguised as humor. And once that happens, they don't get another chance. That's the truth they feel, but can't say out loud. They're not watching to celebrate you. They're watching to prepare. Because deep down, they know this. You didn't just survive what broke others. You learned how to weaponize it. And that's why they're terrified. Number 2. The version of you that never leaves their head, even when they beg for silence. The most dangerous version of you isn't the one that fights back. It's the one that lives rent-free in their head, calm, undefeated, and out of reach. There's a version of you walking around in their minds that they cannot shut off. It follows them into quiet rooms. It shows up in conversations that have nothing to do with you. It sits there when they're alone, staring back at them while they pretend everything is fine. That version doesn't ask permission. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't need closure. It just exists. And its existence alone is enough to rot their peace from the inside. That version doesn't look like the one you see in the mirror. You look at yourself and still notice the cracks, the exhaustion, the moments you almost folded, the doubts you never voiced. You remember how close you came to disappearing, to giving up, to shrinking just to survive. They don't see any of that. They never did. What they see is the end result, stripped of context, stripped of struggle. And without the backstory, your survival looks terrifying. In their heads, you are already ahead. You're already winning situations that haven't even played out yet. You're already 5 steps past conversations they're still rehearsing. You're already prepared for outcomes they haven't imagined. They don't picture you hesitating. They picture you watching, calculating, choosing your moves slowly while they panic in real time. That's why they assume you know things you never said. That's why they project plans onto you that you never announced. That's why they second-guess themselves after every decision that involves your name. Here's the brutal truth. They don't remember you as insecure. They remember you as contained. Someone who felt deeply but didn't leak it everywhere. Someone who took hits quietly and kept moving. Someone who didn't fall apart publicly, even when they were bleeding privately. And that scares people who rely on chaos to stay ahead. Imagine this. You're playing a game of chess, but the other side never touches a piece. They just sit there, watching, silent, calm, letting you move first, letting you expose your patterns, letting you rush. That silence would eat at you. You'd start imagining traps that might not even exist. That's exactly how your presence feels to them now. They don't see your doubts. They see discipline. They don't see your overthinking. They see strategy. They don't see your pain. They see the tool your pain forged. People don't fear strength they can measure. They fear restraint they can't read. That's the version of you that lives in their heads. Someone unpredictable, not because they're reckless, but because they're no longer reactive. Someone who doesn't chase outcomes, doesn't beg for clarity, doesn't rush to be understood. Someone who learned to trust their own judgment more than noise, opinions, or approval. You wonder why they keep misjudging you even now, why they assume you're plotting something when you're just living. It's because once someone realizes they underestimated you, their mind fills in the blanks with worst-case scenarios. Your silence becomes intention. Your patience becomes threat. Your growth becomes accusation. Imagine this. You walk into a room and don't say a word. Nobody addresses it. Nobody comments, but everyone feels it. Chairs shift, voices lower, jokes land softer. That's not charisma. That's psychological gravity. That's what happens when someone's internal version of you is bigger than the one standing in front of them. They carry that version with them everywhere. They take it to bed. They take it into arguments. They take it into decisions they swear have nothing to do with you. And the more you stay unbothered, the worse it gets for them. You ask yourself, why do they act like I'm always one move away from something? Because in their heads, you already crossed the line they're afraid of. They imagine you finally seeing what they saw first. They imagine the moment your self-image snaps into alignment with their perception. That moment terrifies them, because once you see yourself clearly, you stop tolerating nonsense without making a scene. You stop engaging in power games that require your energy. You stop reacting emotionally to disrespect, disguised as humor. You stop explaining yourself to people who already decided who you were years ago. Fear doesn't come from what you did. It comes from what you might do once you stop doubting yourself. They don't think you're perfect. They think you're awake. Awake people are dangerous to systems built on denial. Awake people don't need to shout. They don't need to dominate. They don't need to win every argument. They just move differently. And that difference destabilizes environments that rely on predictability. Imagine this. A storm hits a city and destroys everything loud and fragile. When it passes, the only thing left standing is the quiet structure nobody paid attention to. That's you. You weren't flashy. You weren't loud. You weren't admired early. But you lasted. And longevity scares people who live on temporary wins. They don't see your fear because you already walked through it. They don't see your insecurity because you already faced it alone. They don't see your confusion because you learned how to sit with uncertainty without panicking. That's why the version of you in their head feels unstoppable. It's not emotional, it's grounded. You might ask, if they see me this way, why did they treat me like nothing before? Because people only respect power once it's undeniable. Before that, they test, they poke, they minimize, they see how much they can get away with. You passed their tests without even knowing you were taking them, and now they're stuck with the consequences. Nothing haunts someone more than realizing they helped sharpen the blade aimed at their own illusions. They replay moments. They wonder when it happened, when you stopped needing them, when you stopped looking for permission, when you stopped seeking validation. They can't pinpoint it, and that uncertainty eats them alive. The version of you in their head isn't cruel, it's not loud, it's not dramatic. That's what makes it unbearable. It's composed, observant, detached. It doesn't rush revenge. It doesn't need closure. It doesn't need to prove anything. It just moves forward. And here's the part that should settle something inside you. The version of you they fear isn't imaginary. It's just ahead of your current self. It's the version that fully accepts what you've become. The version that stops downplaying your impact. The version that stops questioning why people react the way they do. That version already exists. They've been living with it for a while. You're just late to the meeting. And when you finally catch up, when you stop seeing yourself through old wounds and start seeing yourself through their eyes, the fear won't be loud. It'll be silent. Because silence is what follows when people realize they can't undo what they helped create. That's the version of you they carry. That's the version they can't escape. And that's why they'll never be comfortable again. Number 3. You don't try to scare them. That's exactly why it works. The most unsettling people aren't loud. They're uncontrollable. You don't terrify them because you threaten anyone. You don't intimidate them with aggression, volume, or force. That's what amateurs do. That's what people without depth rely on. You terrify them because nothing about you can be steered anymore. No buttons, no leash, no script. And for people who survive by controlling others, that is a nightmare scenario. They look at you and realize something broke in you a long time ago. Not in a tragic way, in a freeing way. Whatever part of you once begged to be liked, once needed permission, once feared being alone, it died under pressure. And what came back didn't need applause, didn't chase belonging, didn't negotiate its worth. That version of you scares them because it cannot be bribed. You don't react the way you're supposed to. You don't fall into the emotional traps. You don't mirror their energy. You don't rush to defend yourself when they poke. That absence of reaction forces them to face something ugly. Their tactics only work on people who still need something. You don't. Imagine this. A room full of actors reciting lines they memorized years ago. Then you walk in and don't read the script. You don't argue with it. You don't expose it. You simply don't participate. The entire performance collapses. That's what your presence does. It doesn't attack the system. It reveals it. They sense that you already lost what they're afraid to lose: comfort, approval, belonging. Once someone survives that loss, they stop being manageable. You don't fear isolation because you've already lived there. You don't fear silence because it taught you clarity. You don't fear rejection because it trained you to stand without witnesses. Freedom doesn't announce itself. It makes others uncomfortable just by existing. They feel it when you walk away calmly. They feel it when you don't chase closure. They feel it when you let them keep their excuses without correcting them. Every non-reaction feels like judgment, even when you're not judging at all. Here's the question you're probably asking yourself. If I'm so free, why do I still feel heavy sometimes? Because freedom isn't light, it's responsibility. You see things clearly now. You notice manipulation. You sense fake concern. You recognize chains because you once wore them, and they see that recognition in your eyes. Free people don't follow emotional cues. They don't play assigned roles. They don't react on command. And when others see that, it forces a comparison they didn't ask for. Your freedom becomes a mirror, and most people don't like what it reflects. That's why they're unsettled around you. That's why they can't relax. That's why they watch instead of engage. You don't terrify them by doing anything. You terrify them by being what they can't become without tearing their whole life apart. And deep down, they know it. Number 4. You went quiet, and they wrote their own nightmare. Silence doesn't erase you. It lets other people expose themselves trying to explain you. While you healed in silence, they couldn't handle the gap you left behind. You stopped explaining. You stopped correcting lies. You stopped defending your name like it was on trial. And the moment you did that, their minds went to work without your permission. Humans hate unanswered questions, so they filled the silence with stories. That's where the mythology started. Every time your name came up, it came with tension. Someone added a detail. Someone exaggerated a moment. Someone projected their fear. You weren't there to confirm or deny anything, so the story kept mutating. You changed. You're different now. You're not the same person. They whispered it like a warning. They were right, just not in the way they think. You didn't change into something fake. You didn't reinvent yourself for attention. You didn't perform growth. You shed what was never yours to carry. You stopped playing the role that kept others comfortable, and you let the real version of you breathe. That shift always looks threatening to people who survive by masks. Imagine this. A city loses power at night. No lights, no noise, no distractions. Suddenly, everyone notices what was always there, but ignored. That's what your silence did. It cut the noise. And without noise, truth gets loud. They noticed you weren't reacting anymore. They noticed you weren't explaining yourself. They noticed you weren't chasing closure. And because they didn't understand discipline, they called it mystery. People create legends when they can't access the truth. They assumed distance meant strategy, calm meant calculation, growth meant danger. Not because you were plotting anything, but because silence forces insecure minds to invent threats. You became a question mark they couldn't answer, and unanswered questions rot people from the inside. You might wonder, why didn't they just ask me? Because asking requires humility, and admitting they misjudged you would shatter the story they built to protect their ego. So instead, they watched. They speculated. They filled in blanks with fear. Here's the part you need to understand. You didn't become a legend by trying to be one. You became it by refusing to explain yourself to people who never listened anyway. You didn't announce your evolution. You let it speak through absence, restraint, and consistency. And that scared them more than any announcement ever could. Because authenticity wrapped in silence feels unstoppable. You didn't disappear. You removed access. And once access is gone, imagination does the damage for you. Number 5. You broke their formula, and now they're panicking in circles. People don't lose their minds when you attack them. They lose it when their usual tricks stop working. They tried to figure you out the old way. That's the funny part. They went back to outdated data like it still meant something. Old messages, old reactions, old versions of you that no longer exist. They stared at screens, reread conversations, zoomed in on words you wrote years ago, hunting for patterns that used to give them leverage. Nothing worked. They watched your social media like it owed them answers. Every post, every silence, every gap between appearances turned into a puzzle. They asked mutuals questions disguised as care. How's he doing? Is she okay? Pretending concern while fishing for weakness. Every line they cast came back empty. Because the version of you they studied is gone. You didn't just improve, you erased the blueprint. You burned the instruction manual they relied on to predict you. While they were still memorizing your old behavior, you were rewriting your internal rules. New boundaries, new reactions, new priorities, same body, different operating system. Imagine this. Someone keeps trying to unlock a door with a key that no longer fits. Instead of questioning the key, they keep forcing it, blaming the lock, convinced the problem isn't them. That's exactly what's happening. They're stuck applying old logic to a new reality. Control only works when the target stays familiar. You stopped being familiar. They can't bait you into emotional responses anymore. They can't trigger guilt the way they used to. They can't provoke explanations or apologies. Even your silence doesn't behave the way it did before. It's not heavy. It's clean. And that confuses them. You might be wondering, why does this bother them so much? Because decoding people is how they stay ahead. Predictability is power. Once someone becomes unreadable, the power balance shifts instantly. They don't know how to approach you, how to talk to you, how to position themselves around you. That uncertainty eats at them. Imagine playing a game where the rules suddenly change, but only for one player. Everyone else is still stuck following instructions that no longer apply. You're not cheating, you're just not bound to their system anymore. And that's terrifying. They don't fear what you're doing. They fear what you might do now that they can't track you. Because someone they can't decode can't be manipulated. Someone they can't predict can't be managed. Someone they can't read becomes a risk they can't eliminate. You didn't disappear from their understanding. You outgrew it. And that's the moment they realized they lost control for good. Number 6. When you're gone, you become the standard that ruins everything else. Nothing embarrasses people more than realizing the best thing they had only made sense after they broke it. When you're not in the room, you still control it. That's the part they never admit out loud. Your name doesn't come up casually. It drops like weight. Every new person they meet gets compared to a memory they pretend doesn't matter anymore. Same questions, same quiet disappointment, same conclusion. Does this one have that presence, those eyes that see too much, that calm that doesn't beg for attention? And every time, the answer lands the same. No. They try to replace you the way people replace habits, quickly, carelessly, with substitutes that look similar from far away but collapse under pressure. They laugh louder with new people. They talk more. They perform more. Because the silence you carried required depth, and depth isn't easy to fake. You weren't just someone in their life. You were a reference point, a mirror that showed them who they were and who they weren't willing to become. Being around you demanded honesty, self-awareness, growth. They failed that test, and instead of admitting it, they walked away and told themselves a safer story. People don't miss comfort. They miss intensity they can't recreate. Now imagine this. Someone tastes real food after years of processed junk. They try to go back to the old diet, but it doesn't hit the same. That's you. You changed their internal standard without asking permission. Everything after you feels thin, rushed, unfinished. They don't talk about you with anger anymore. That phase passed. Now it's comparison, regret disguised as critique, nostalgia pretending to be indifference. They'll say, "It was complicated," when what they mean is, "I didn't rise to the level required." You didn't haunt them on purpose. You didn't demand to be remembered. You just existed fully. And now every replacement exposes the damage they caused themselves. They chase echoes. They replay moments. They try to rebuild something they shattered with impatience, ego, and fear. You were an experience they'll never repeat. And that's the punishment. Number 7. You're not a lesson anymore. You're the warning they use to keep others in line. When people fail to stop you, they rewrite you into a cautionary tale. They don't talk about you with curiosity anymore. They talk about you like a risk factor, like something that shouldn't be repeated. Your name gets lowered in volume, wrapped in side-eye, followed by phrases meant to sound wise, but drip with fear. Careful, different, doesn't follow rules, doesn't care what people think. That's not criticism. That's panic wearing a calm voice. What they're really saying is this: you figured out something that shattered the logic they live by. You realized the rules were never neutral. They were cages dressed up as guidance. You noticed how obedience was rewarded with approval, not freedom. And instead of adapting better to the prison, you walked out of it. That's unforgivable to people still locked inside. Imagine this. A group survives in a small room for years, convincing each other the walls are protection. Then one person leaves and doesn't die, doesn't beg to come back, doesn't fall apart. Suddenly the room doesn't feel safe anymore. It feels exposed. That's what your existence does to them now. Nothing threatens a system more than proof that escape was always possible. They warn others about you because your story makes excuses collapse. If you could step away from approval, manipulation, and fear-based living, then what does that say about everyone who stayed? If you could survive without the validation they cling to, then what exactly are they holding on to? They can't answer that. So they turn you into a warning. They'll say, "You're cold." What they mean is you're not controllable. They'll say you're distant. What they mean is you don't need permission. They'll say you're dangerous. What they mean is you don't fear consequences designed to scare obedient people. You didn't break rules for attention. You stopped respecting rules that only existed to keep people small, and now they use your name like a scarecrow, hoping others won't follow the same path. But here's the part they hate most. Warnings don't work when the outcome looks like freedom. You didn't collapse. You didn't spiral. You didn't regret it. You became clearer, stronger, harder to influence. And that truth leaks through every story they tell about you, no matter how they dress it up. You're not the villain in their story. You're the proof they were wrong. And that's why they'll never stop talking about you. Number 8. You didn't walk away. You phased out of their reality. Some exits aren't dramatic. They're irreversible. You didn't just leave their circle. Leaving implies you could come back. You didn't storm out, announce growth, or burn bridges for show. You slipped out of their reach entirely. Different pace, different mindset, different rules. You didn't move on. You moved out of range. While they stayed recycling the same conversations, the same arguments, the same power games, you changed the channel. Same faces, same drama, same excuses. Meanwhile, you recalibrated. Not louder, not flashier, cleaner, sharper, detached from the noise that once fed them. That's why contact feels impossible now. That's why conversations feel awkward. That's why nothing lands the way it used to. Distance isn't measured in miles. It's measured in awareness. They look at you from the outside and don't recognize the terrain anymore. You're not speaking their language. You're not reacting to their triggers. You're not chasing the same winds. And that confuses people who never learned how to upgrade without external permission. Imagine this. 2 people start a race on the same track. One keeps running laps. The other leaves the stadium. From the stands, it looks like quitting. From reality, it's evolution. That's what happened. You didn't lose momentum. You left the loop. Now, when they see you, they don't see a person. They see evidence. Evidence that their rules were optional. Evidence that their approval wasn't oxygen. Evidence that survival didn't require self-betrayal. That kind of proof is unbearable to people still trading pieces of themselves for acceptance. Your existence invalidates their excuses without saying a word. You don't preach. You don't recruit. You simply live differently. And that eats at them. You might ask, why do they seem irritated even when I'm silent? Because silence from someone who escaped feels like judgment. Your calm becomes an accusation. Your progress exposes stagnation they've been dressing up as loyalty or tradition. They don't hate your success. They hate the reminder that they chose comfort over freedom. You didn't rise above them by force. You stepped out of their gravity, and once someone leaves a frequency, there's no translating it back for those who refuse to tune in. You didn't abandon them. You outgrew the signal, and now all they can do is watch, knowing they can't follow without dismantling everything they built their identity on. Number 9. They made you bigger than life, so they wouldn't have to face themselves. When people can't live with their choices, they inflate the person who exposed them. They didn't wake up one day and decide to turn you into a legend. They were cornered into it. Your absence left a gap they couldn't explain with logic, so they reached for exaggeration. When you weren't there to react, to defend, to shrink, the only story that made sense to them was that you had become something beyond reach. That's how legends start, not from glory, from guilt. They needed a reason why you walked away and didn't fall apart. They needed a reason why their tactics stopped working. They needed a reason why life felt smaller after you left. So they built you up in their minds until you felt overwhelming, intense, untouchable. Not because you were those things on purpose, but because admitting the truth would destroy the version of themselves they're protecting. The bigger they make you, the smaller they don't have to feel. So they rewrote the narrative. You became too much, impossible, dangerous. Not in the heroic sense, in the threatening sense. It was easier to frame you as extreme than to admit they lacked depth. Easier to call you unstable than to admit you were consistent. Easier to label you unpredictable than to face how predictable they were. Imagine this. Someone breaks a priceless object, and instead of admitting carelessness, they claim it was defective all along. That's what they did with you. You didn't shatter because you were flawed. You broke their illusion of control. Every story they told about you grew sharper over time. Details got heavier, motives got darker. Your silence allowed their imagination to run wild, and imagination always fills gaps with fear. What they didn't realize is that every word they spoke added weight to your presence. Legends aren't built by those who leave. They're built by those who can't stop talking after. They tried to make you the villain so they could be the victim. But villains are powerful figures in every story, central, memorable, feared. By turning you into the threat, they gave you permanence. You became the benchmark they compare against, the name that still stirs emotion, the standard no replacement meets. You never asked for power. You earned it by refusing to beg for understanding. You let them talk. You let them exaggerate. You let them mythologize you without interference. And in doing so, you stepped out of the narrative while still controlling it. Now you exist larger in memory than you ever did in person. That's not arrogance. That's consequence. They didn't ruin your name. They elevated it. And now they're stuck living in the shadow of a legend they created themselves. Number 10. You walk in and the room remembers what survival looks like. Energy doesn't announce itself. It reorganizes the space. You feel it the second you enter a room. Conversations lose rhythm. Laughter tightens. People adjust their posture without knowing why. When you speak, they listen harder than they mean to. When you go quiet, the air gets heavy, like something important just stopped moving. That's not imagination. That's recognition. You carry the residue of survival, not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, the kind that rewires a person from the inside out. You've already been through the worst part, the isolation, the collapse of illusions, the moment where nothing saved you except your ability to stay standing. People sense that before logic ever shows up, long before words, long before facts. Survival leaves a signature, and it's never subtle. They don't know your story in detail, but their instincts catch the ending. Their body reads what their mind hasn't processed yet. This is someone who doesn't panic. This is someone who doesn't need the room. This is someone who can walk away without losing themselves. That kind of presence unsettles people who are still performing just to belong. Imagine this. A building survives an earthquake while everything around it cracks. Nobody needs an explanation. They just know which structure to trust. That's you now. You're not louder than the room. You're sturdier than it. You might wonder why people lean in when you speak, even when you're saying less than before. It's because your words don't beg to be believed. They land with weight. You don't over-explain. You don't decorate your point. You say what needs to be said and let silence do the rest. Silence hits harder when it's earned. And when you stop talking, that's when discomfort shows up. Because silence from someone like you feels intentional. It feels chosen. It makes people confront their own noise, their nervous jokes, their need to fill space. You don't compete for attention anymore. You command it by not chasing it. Imagine this: a calm animal in a room full of restless ones. No aggression, no display, just stillness. Everything else reacts to it. That's the shift. You didn't become intimidating by trying. You became it by surviving something that stripped the fear out of you. People feel that, and they don't know what to do with it. That's the energy you carry now, and once it's earned, it never leaves. Number 11. Your silence isn't passive. It's the move that starved them. Silence is only weak to people who survive by noise. Your silence isn't empty. It's loaded. It's not absence. It's pressure. You didn't go quiet because you had nothing to say. You went quiet because you finally understood something most people never do. Words were never the battlefield. Attention was. And the moment you stopped feeding it, everything they built started collapsing. You stopped explaining yourself, not because you were wrong, but because you realized explanation is a trap. Every sentence you gave them used to get twisted. Every clarification became ammunition. Every defense kept their story alive. So you did the one thing they weren't prepared for. You withdrew. That broke the cycle. They didn't want truth. They wanted reaction. Your silence pulled the plug on their narrative. They needed you to argue so they could feel right. They needed you to defend so they could keep accusing. They needed your emotional energy to justify their behavior. Without it, they were left talking to themselves, and that's when things got ugly. Imagine this. Someone keeps throwing punches in a fight, and suddenly there's no opponent, no resistance, no noise, just empty air. Eventually they realize they're not fighting a person anymore, they're exposing themselves. That's what your silence did. It forced them to hear their own voice without interruption. You might ask, does silence make me look weak? Only to people who need chaos to feel powerful. To everyone else, silence reads as control. It says you're not desperate, you're not defensive, you're not chasing understanding from people committed to misunderstanding you. Silence is what happens when you stop negotiating your worth. They couldn't twist it, they couldn't quote it, they couldn't weaponize it. Silence doesn't contradict itself, it doesn't slip, it doesn't beg. And because they couldn't manipulate it, they feared it. You reclaimed your narrative the moment you stopped participating in theirs. You didn't correct lies. You let time do that. You didn't expose them. You let their behavior speak. You didn't chase closure. You let distance settle the truth. Now, when you go quiet, it lands heavier than any argument ever did. Because silence from someone who knows the truth feels final. It tells them the game is over, even if they're still playing. That's why your silence isn't weakness. It's the weapon that ended the war without a single shot. Number 12. The confession they'll carry to the grave and never say out loud. Words give people something to fight. Silence forces them to face themselves. Here's the truth they'll never admit. Not to you, not to others, not even to themselves. Your silence did more damage than any confrontation ever could. Words can be debated. Words can be reframed, mocked, dismissed, or rewritten. Silence can't. Silence sits with them. Silence follows them home. Silence echoes when the noise dies down. You became the unanswered question they can't escape. Every time they thought they'd moved on, your silence resurfaced. not as memory, as pressure, as the thing that never got resolved, never got closure, never gave them the relief of a final argument. They wanted a fight because a fight would have let them feel justified. You denied them that. Unanswered questions don't fade. They rot. While they talked, you changed. While they analyzed your past, you rebuilt your future. While they dissected your silence for hidden meaning, you were too busy outgrowing the environment that needed explanations. They stayed stuck reviewing footage. You left the stadium. Imagine this. Someone keeps replaying the same scene, convinced they missed something crucial. Meanwhile, the person they're watching is already living a different life, under different rules, on a different level. That gap drives people insane. Not because they lost you, but because they can't reach you anymore. They'll never say it, but they know this. You didn't lose. You didn't fail. You didn't fall behind. You simply stopped participating in a game designed to drain you, confuse you, and keep you small. Walking away without noise is the loudest verdict there is. Your silence told them everything. It told them you saw through it. It told them you didn't need validation. It told them you weren't waiting for an apology or understanding. It told them the outcome was already decided. And that's what haunts them. Not anger, not revenge, not confrontation. Finality. You didn't slam the door. You didn't announce your exit. You just closed access and never looked back. And now they're left arguing with memories, debating with ghosts, and trying to win against someone who already left the board. You didn't stop playing because you were afraid to lose. You stopped because the game was beneath you, and they'll live with that truth long after the noise fades. So now you see it. The picture is complete, and there's nothing left to explain. You didn't rise by accident, and you didn't survive for nothing. What you became was earned in silence, pressure, and restraint. And once you see yourself clearly, there's no going back to the smaller version they were comfortable with. If this message hit where it was supposed to, lock it in. Like the video, subscribe to strengthen this signal, drop 77 in the comments if you're still standing with this frequency, and share it with someone who needs to remember who they really are.